Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Safety. It's Everybody's Business, a free webinar brought to you by the Maryland Recycling Network and the Solid Waste Association of North America. I'm Peter Houstel, MRN's Executive Director, and will soon be joined by Jim Olson, President of J.H. Olson and Associates and former VP of Safety for Republic Services. Jim's going to share training, process, equipment, and technology solutions you can employ to build a culture of safety in your operation and hopefully save some lives. But before we go there, let's take a minute to look at what's coming up on our calendar. On Thursday, March 27th, Chaz Miller of Chaz Miller and Associates and Gretchen Carey from Mass Recycle will tell us how we can debunk disinformation and gain community support by telling the real story about recycling. We'll follow that up on Thursday, April 10th, with a webinar on local food waste prevention campaigns as part of Food Waste Prevention Week. Then on Thursday, April 24th, Lisa Scianella will give us a tour of HelpC's new textile facility in Upper Marlboro. On Tuesday, May 20th, you can help us drive reuse in Maryland by volunteering with us at Community Forklift in Hyattsville. And of course, on Monday, June 9th, I sure hope to see you at the Turf Valley Conference Center for the 2025 MRN SWANA Mid-Atlantic Conference. You can see the preliminary program on our website. And of course, exhibit sales along with registration are open now. So be sure to check out the website for details. And on the admin side of things, please feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat box. And we'll be posting a recording of the webinar on our website next week, which you're welcome to share with any and all who might be interested. So while most of these programs are free, they depend on the financial support of our members. So let me start by offering a big thank you to all of our current members. Though, as I'm sure you've heard me say many times before, we don't have any non-members. We just have paying members and non-paying members. So if you're one of the non-paying members, please head over to our website after this program and join today. You can become a paying member for as little as $25 a year. That's like 50 cents a week. Thank you. And speaking of support, I want to give a shout out to our sustaining and patron members whose contributions, along with that of all our members, help us continue to support your efforts to drive reduction, reuse, and recycling in Maryland. Okay, without further ado, it's time to turn the mic and the screen over to Jim so he can help us make safety a no-brainer. Jim, take it away.
So like Peter said, my name is Jim Olson, and I'm formerly the Vice President of Safety for Republic Services. And prior to that, I worked for Waste Management. I worked in the, I guess, kind of service delivery side for direct delivery work. I worked in a printing industry facility for a while, but I want to just bring my knowledge and experience to this group and share best practices. And like Peter said, that's how we get things done, quite frankly, is by working together with associations and ultimately not recreating the wheel, but sharing best practices. So basically, just to kind of talk a little bit about what the agenda is for today, we are going to cover quite a few different things on both the collection side of the business and what we do on a daily business and in the work that we do every day. But then we're also going to talk about post-collection and what you can do at your facilities to improve your safety procedures and processes, training, and technology. So specifically, I want to jump in first to direct vision. So one of the things that is really important to me when we talk about safety is direct vision. And what direct vision means is that as an operator of a piece of equipment or a truck, pickup truck, collection vehicle, your personal car, quite frankly, the best way to avoid incidents is to actually be able to see things with direct vision. When you think of a collection vehicle or any other vehicle, there are some, surprisingly high percentage of blind spots that are around your vehicle at any given time. And you can see in the illustration on the top of this screen some of those vision blockers. And some of them are just based on the design of the piece of equipment. So like when you look out the passenger car or passenger window of a passenger car, you have a door. You have a window above the door, but you actually have a door where you can't see out to the side. the bigger the piece of the equipment, the higher that particular blind spot is out the window. So in the illustration to the right, for example, you could have pedestrians right next to a truck on a bicycle, walking, scooters, anything, and whoever's operating that can't see that individual. So basically, there's a group called the Volpe Center, and they're located up in Massachusetts, Cambridge area, and they've done a bunch of different studies on high vision and what ultimately can be seen and can't be seen. And at the end of the day, what they've found is that the best direct vision vehicles are obviously cab over vehicles, which again, you can see in the pictures above. So think of school buses. That's one of my favorite examples to use on where direct vision has gone. Back in the day when I rolled a school bus, they were all conventional cabs. They all had a big nose on them. The engine was obviously in front of the driver. Now you rarely see those vehicles. They're almost all cab over design. Why'd they do that? Obviously, pedestrian and child safety. Is the operators of the school bus couldn't see kids as they crossed in front of the bus until they improved that visibility. So to further kind of show you examples of that, this is a truck that's available through McNeilus. Republic, where I used to work, is actually running this truck on streets now, but it is designed to be a high vision vehicle for direct vision. So you can see in the illustration on both the top and the bottom one is obviously the real truck, the top one is a graphic representation, is especially with the spot window in the bottom of the door on the passenger side, your direct vision to the right is substantially better than it would be, and I'll flip back for just a second, that conventional cab that's more of an old school design in red in the middle of the screen there for the photos. So the intent of this is to try to improve design. Now, my real talking point around this isn't necessarily we're going to replace our whole fleets with this direct vision, vehicle, but what it's really around is as an operator of a piece of equipment, you really have to make sure you understand that your equipment has blind spots. What's interesting is people that operate heavy equipment and trucks totally innately understand that, and that's why we have backup cameras on a lot of the pieces of equipment that we operate. But when you're going forward, you still do have blind spots. And the most, I guess, clear example are A-pillars and mirror assemblies. So I don't know if everybody knows what an A-pillar is, but an A-pillar is actually the metal aluminum in your piece of equipment or your personal car that's the sides of your separation from your front windshield to your passenger side and driver side windows. And it's surprisingly large in most applications. And just to kind of engage the group a little bit, does anybody know why that's so big in personal vehicles? So your car, your pickup truck that you drive yourself, why is that A-pillar so wide today compared to maybe vehicles you drove 25 years ago? What's in that A-pillar today? Does anybody know the answer?
Airbag.
Airbags.
Airbags, exactly. So now you have this airbag situation. And what's interesting is why do they have airbags? The focus is on preventing incidents for the occupant of the vehicle. Unfortunately, they weren't thinking of external factors, i.e., pedestrians. So, what your drivers really need to do when they're operating their piece of equipment is what we like to say bob and weave. If you simply lean forward or you simply lean to the side, you can clearly see around that A pillar. So you have to be an active driver when it comes to looking around both your A pillar and your mirror assembly. Now, depending on the configuration of the vehicle, it's often very challenging to see directly in front of you, even though you can sit up in your seat and lean forward. If it's a conventional cab, you're going to be limited in what you can see. But the point is, again, is the training that you provide really has to take into consideration the specific vehicle that they're operating. If they're in a high vision vehicle, that's awesome, but it still has blind spots. If they're in a conventional cab, that's an older piece of equipment, that's still functional. You can still be safe on the roadway, but you need to be a much more active driver and look around any blind spots that you might have. So one of the tools that Volpe worked on was actually a direct vision rating system. And then an organization called Together for Safer Roads, which I'm also a part of, simplified that to come up with a simple 5-star rating for your piece of equipment that you operate for both front view and side view. And all it is a simple measurement. Can I see something or can't I see something? And the further away from the vehicle it moves, the lower your score is going to be. But at the end of the day, all vehicles have about a 1-star to 2-star rating. Cab overs are almost always 3 or 4 already. You really have to get the examples I had of that McNeilus vehicle in order to get a 5-star rating. But again, the point is depending on the star rating of your vehicle, you really need to change what you do from a training perspective. So digging a little bit more into training, and again, this isn't just vehicles on the road. Like in the bottom picture here, you can see these are some more conventional cab over design vehicles that Republic runs, but it also applies to heavy equipment. So you can see the small track loader in the bottom or in the top picture in this screen. And the intent of this particular, slide is one of the best ways to get people to be trained on seeing hazards around direct vision is actually doing skills and drills. So in both of these examples, these are little simple skills courses that an operator or driver would navigate their piece of equipment through. And in the top one, you can see it's basically kind of a right turn, and then you back up and you perform that same right turn backing maneuver. But what they're really doing is they're trying to make sure they have vision of all of those cones at all times, because if they don't and they lose vision, that's when you're actually going to strike something. The picture in the bottom is actually set up with toters as a serpentine course. So the operator would actually serpentine through those containers, both forward and backward. And why you really need to think about how you train is the question I have on here, which is all organizations, I'm sure on this call and, any organization that has a safety program does safety training. But the real question is are you just training, or are your employees, drivers, and operators learning something? And I believe that hands-on learning is the best way for people to really absorb what you're trying to talk about. So just like this is a lot to absorb on a call, if we were physically together and we were able to go out on a course and you could actually see in the cab what I'm talking about, the absorption of that is going to be much higher. So one of the things I really highly encourage you all to do is actually implement some skills training into your teams. So the skills training piece doesn't have to be closed course like you see in these pictures. It can be observation based. You can go on route with one of your employees, or you can see them when they're, pushing trash or recycling on a tipping floor in your facility, and just talk to them real time about what they're seeing and what they're not seeing, quite frankly, and really try to educate them on the value of bobbing and weaving, moving in the cab, using all the tools that you have available in order to have the direct vision to be as safe as possible. One other thing you can do, and this is something SWANA, and maybe you can put the date in there, Kristen, because I couldn't find it, but our rodeo challenges. So SWANA holds a rodeo every year. Well, I think every year or every other year, Kristen. That's what I couldn't remember either. I think it's every
Yeah,
year.
it usually is every year.
Yeah,
Well,
in the
many of the
summertime,
chapters have
right?
rodeos, and then there's a international rodeo. I'll put the link in the chat here. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, and is there a date for the international one yet? I don't know that.
Um, I Let me check on that real quick.
Okay.
I can share it.
So I've been to the SWANA International Rodeo. Republic does a rodeo themselves. They actually just had it a couple weeks ago. But it's a great way to kind of apply the skills that you learned. But more importantly, it's a great way to recognize your teams. And you can participate in the SWANA chapter rodeos. If your operators and drivers perform well enough, they can participate in the national championship. But either way, having some sort of rodeo event is just an awesome way to engage with your teams. There's lots of different examples. The SWANA, kind of example is really complete. I think there's around 7 challenges that drivers, operators would compete in throughout the course of the rodeo activity. And it's just a great way to supplement what you're doing for training, as opposed to maybe doing just a picnic. Incorporate some sort of rodeo associated with it. One other caveat is, in addition to drivers and operators, there are technician rodeos too. Now, those are a little bit different because obviously they're doing inspection of equipment. But just keep in mind that there's a lot of different ways you can engage your workforce associated with rodeos and skills courses. So again, these first few slides that I wanted to share are really all around direct vision. So, lesson learned, lots of vehicles have blind spots, need to be an active driver and actively be paying attention in order to remove the hazard associated with those blind spots. Now, in addition to that, though, there are a lot of different technologies out there to help employees really, perform at a high level, and eliminate blind spots, eliminate distractions, and all of those types of things. For on-the-road drivers, there's lots of different companies out there. I actually do some advisory work for a company called Motive. These are basically screenshots from their product around distracted driving. So you can see in the bottom, somebody's looking at their cell phone, and as a result, they're following the vehicle in front of them too closely. There's AI capacity in these products that basically give the driver a heads up that they're following too closely or that they're distracted. Lytx, it used to be called DriveCam, has a product. Samsara has a product. There's a whole bunch of different products out there from a technology perspective to really help focus attention on what's going on the road around you. And like I said, Motive is the one I do advisory work for, but I encourage you to kind of look at different opportunities for technology. Most of the technology is kind of something you need to stitch or tie together, where use Lytx as an example. Lytx has a great platform in the cab of the vehicle, but they don't do anything for backing sensors and technology. So I think probably quite a few of you on the phone have Third Eye or other Preco's and other technology out there that does additional sensors for side hazards, backing hazards, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of all, I don't want to say haphazard, but you end up working with a bunch of different vendors in order to implement technologies that are effective on your vehicle. And again, not just over the road. This is pictures of over the road, but same application for landfills. If you're operating a piece of heavy equipment at the landfill, there's technology that you can put on your vehicle to identify pedestrians and identify other pieces of equipment that are operating in that same area. But today, it's kind of, like I said, haphazard isn't the right word, but it really is, in that it's a bunch of different technologies that are trying to tie together. And that's really what's available today. Now, what's really interesting, though, is coming soon, I believe, is something that's more fully encompassing. And through Together for Safer Roads, one of the big companies in the room is AB InBev. And AB InBev is doing a lot of trialing with a 360-degree system that literally is going to do a ton of different things, including external speakers. So you can see in this illustration in the top middle, it's got the pedestrian visual and audible alert, but not just for in the cab, for externally too. There are a lot of buses that do this now. I know in the DC area in particular, you'll hear, I guess, verbal cues coming from buses as they're making turns, where it'll tell you that that vehicle's about to make a right turn. So bringing all of this technology together is what's going to be available very soon. And I'm super excited because direct vision is a great solution, but there's always going to be blind spots. But when you tie technology and identification of hazards through systems like what AB InBev is trialing right now, that's going to be the best answer for the situation. So super excited about what they're doing in an area of road safety for all of us. This doesn't just help the waste and recycling industry. Clearly that AB InBev vehicle is delivering beverages. There's a lot of different organizations that are going to benefit from safer vehicles. One other just kind of highlight in terms of TSR is UPS is also one of the big members of that particular group, and they're doing a lot of pilots and trials too. And what I like about the big guys being involved in all of this is we're going to learn from them. At the end of the day, smaller organizations are going to learn from this. Amazon is actually doing a lot of work too. You know, Amazon employs over 1 million, people now, and they're doing a lot of technology trials and testing. So I think that this is going to grow really, really fast, and there's going to be opportunities for us to be safer on our roadways and at our collection sites in regard to vehicles and equipment very, very soon. Switching gears, moving on to post-collection safety, one of the things that we did want to talk about, and I spoke to Peter about this, are other opportunities for safety programs within your workplace. And this is a little bit tied together in terms of the illustration and picture on the top. Is one of the things that makes me nervous when it comes to post-collection safety is placement of vehicles. And unfortunately, in that picture on the top, you can see that it's more than a single cylinder end dump, but basically it's a cylinder driven end dump vehicle that maybe had a load stuck in the top. Maybe it was an uneven surface that they were dumping on. But unfortunately, that collection vehicle was very close to it when it fell. And it's hard to see in the cab here, or in the picture here, but the cab of that yellow collection vehicle was actually crushed by that dump truck. And the only way to solve for that is to have better spacing. Additionally concerning is sometimes when you see collection sites like this, or an active face like this, I should say, you'll see, just general contractors and people with pickup trucks and trailers blended in with the heavy equipment. And that's not an ideal situation. Obviously, the ideal situation is the illustration on the bottom, which is a convenience center type drop off. Now, you still need safety protocols, and I'd highly recommend requiring people to wear high vis, like you can see in the picture here, when they're outside their vehicles, just so they don't run into each other. But safety for that group is much better when you're at some sort of convenience center drop off versus having people actually go up to the active face and dump. But public safety is something that is critically important, I know, to SWANA, and then also their partner in safety is National Waste and Recycling Association. And they've worked together to really put together quite a few different tools and templates that you can use in order to have better workplace procedures and standards for your group. One of the specific examples I have next here, which is site safety best practices for recycling facilities, landfills, and transfer stations. And it's just the top 12 things, right? It's not that complicated. It's very easy for everybody to follow, but it starts with PPE, moves on into control signs and speed limits and spacing, and making sure that, you don't have unnecessary foot traffic outside of vehicles. People stay within near proximity to their pieces of equipment. One of the things that always makes me nervous when I would do ride-alongs with drivers is you'd occasionally see items in their cabs that they got from a disposal site somewhere. And it's like you can't scavenge for your own safety. You get away from your vehicle and go grab something, that's a major safety hazard. So, things like salvaging and scavenging shouldn't be allowed. And then at the end of the day, not being distracted and making eye contact. And that goes back to that direct vision comment that I made before. You really have to make sure that anybody that is working around you has made eye contact with you and there's an opportunity to see each other. So again, this particular document is available through NWRA, and I think you can get it through the SWANA website too, Kristen. But these are just some basic practices that you can put into place for your post-collection sites to protect employees that are there dumping on behalf of their companies, and then also the general public. And just, again, highlighting the whole convenience center drop-off, that's really the best solution in terms of truly separating people. One last kind of comment, when you think about separation and distances, we have in here that the tipping area should be a minimum of 15 feet between vehicles. But for those single cylinder dump vehicles, it should be 50 feet. Because when they're fully extended, they can actually hit somebody that's 50 feet away. Now, for smaller sites, that's a huge challenge because sometimes your active face just has a really hard time handling traffic flow. And then when you have to put in 50 feet for a big single cylinder dump vehicle, that's an issue. but those are all things you need to consider. And in the interest of protecting people, you really need to make sure that you have that proper spacing. One other kind of area when it comes to post-collection safety and just safety at our collection sites in general too are hazardous materials. So hazardous materials obviously can exist anywhere. We pick them up at the curbside, and probably the most common challenge that we're all dealing with, recycling facilities more than most, is lithium batteries. So SWANA, ISRI, and NWRA have worked exhaustively on trying to come up with guidance for people on what's the best way to handle lithium batteries when we find them. The picture in the upper right, you can see that's kind of the scary worst case scenario where a loader like that drives over a disposed lithium battery, and unbeknownst to the driver, it starts to smolder. And if that thing catches on fire, it's going to be a good blaze before a sprinkler system within the facility is going to kick in. So really having good procedures and protocols around lithium batteries is one of the main things I wanted to highlight. Now, there are other hazards that can show up in your waste and recycling materials too. Everybody's familiar with pool chemicals and the reaction they can cause, and fire loads and things like that. But again, it's really all about training and making sure that your teams are educated on what to do in the event of some sort of spill or fire or other incident like that. So any questions? That's what I had actually for materials, and I was kind of hoping to have a little open conversation and give plenty of time. Looks like we still got 20 minutes or so left to kind of answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them into the chat box. If your fingers are not ideal, you're welcome to open your mic to ask your question. I did see that Kristen's posted the safety document and a link to the safety document in the chat, along with some flyers and posters that SWANA makes available, and the dates for upcoming rodeos and other events relative to the safety and training conversation. Thanks, Kristen.
So while we're waiting for a question, I actually saw Krista Yost was on the call, and she's a Republic employee who I know. Krista, are you still out there? Maybe she had to drop, or she's doing something else.
Looks like she's still there, but her mic is being quiet, or she's being bashful.
Quiet. She's being bashful. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, Jim, I'm on the call as well, Liz Tejada. I was just
Liz. There you go.
To Krista actually, but we're not so used to Zoom, so it took me a second to unmute myself as well.
Hey, so what I wanted you guys to just jump in on is, just kind of share your thoughts on the skills that Republic does and the rodeos.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of benefits, and it brings a lot of awareness to our drivers when we do skills practices, because it's that visual cue, and it makes them really realize, some of the things that, might impact them while they're out on route, whether it be collection mode or whether it be at the post-collection facility, especially with those 8 pillars, and some of our older fleet that we have, with those instead of having those cab overs. Absolutely. Even myself, I find myself at an even at times. I believe about a year or two ago, Caterpillar came out with a video, and it said, how many people can you spot, right? And you couldn't see anybody, but then it kind of brings you to that realization that it is so quickly that you can miss something, a pedestrian, whether it could be, another, employee that's working with you. But yeah, absolutely. I love the hands-on, skills practice that we do. And even the rodeo, it really shows what our drivers do every day.
Thanks, Liz. Jim, question in the chat about the increase in the Internet of Things wandering through our systems and the invasion of, well, what some could perceive as an invasion of privacy that occurs, because it's not just the drivers, obviously, that
Yep.
are being observed here, but everybody around that vehicle is being captured on a screen someplace. And so I don't know if there are cybersecurity concerns that you have discussed with other people in the safety field.
Yeah, so not necessarily the general public, that isn't as much of a concern. But there have been a lot of discussions during my career, and I know a lot of companies do, with unions and drivers and privacy issues. And there are different states that have restrictions, I guess I would say, on what you can and can't do. Just as an example, in Illinois, you can't do biometric identification. So a lot of these companies like Lytx, Samsara, and Motive, they can identify by facial recognition who the actual operator of the vehicle is, which is clearly good information if you have different drivers operating different pieces of equipment in different trucks. But you are prohibited in both Texas, actually, and Illinois to using that type of software. So whoever your partner is, they're very well versed in what your limitations are, what you can and can't do, from a legal perspective. Now, from a union perspective, a lot of that is just discussion and understanding as to what you're going to use all of this information for. What's interesting is every single organization I've talked to that's rolled out any type of cameras, there's the initial hesitation associated with, boy, I don't know. But every one of those locations, it's just a matter of time before they have an exoneration video. And just a good example would be you're going down the road, the cross street has a stop sign, but you don't, and someone just flat out runs the stop sign into you. Or it's a four-way stop and you stop, then you go, someone runs it and runs into you. One of those incidents, and all of a sudden the drivers are like, I like it, I mean, it really is helping me. And that's the way they should look at it, because it really isn't about a got you thing. It's not about, trying to catch people doing things the wrong way. It really is for coaching and development. We do want people to improve, but at the same time, it's for your own protection. And what is also interesting is, in my experience, I was running into more and more operators that actually had their own cameras with them. So one of the things you probably have noticed is motorcyclists more and more frequently are wearing cameras on the top of their helmet. They're wearing those because they want to protect themselves, because they get cut off so often that they want some sort of, video recording of what happened, so that they're not the ones that get blamed. So that's the way to answer that question, is you have to work with your teams in order to really fully understand what the requirements would be or restrictions are, and then ultimately work with a union if you're union, or directly with your employees about some of the big brother kind of concerns that they have.
Thank you. Charles asked the question, what is a best in class accident rate for the solid waste industry, and what should we strive for? Besides, I mean, zero obviously is the best in class, but is there a number that we're shooting for here?
Yeah, that's somewhat of a loaded question.
Yeah.
So from a total recordable injury rate perspective, the, I guess, kind of industry average has been hovering in the high fives to low sixes for quite a while. So TRI, our best in class, is literally Waste Management. Because I know what their number is. They share it with me, and theirs is slightly better than Republic's. Waste Connections is also good, and they're right there in the low twos. So like a 2.2 to a 2.3. Nobody's really gotten fully below 2 when it comes to TRIR, but anything below 3, I would say, would be considered, best in class. And even under 4, there you're going to see a lot of different organizations are in that bucket. But the industry number, I wouldn't consider best in class. I would consider something below that. And if you can get below 3, you're truly going to be world class when it comes to safety in our industry. Now, what's interesting about that, and the reason I say it's a loaded question, is if you guys have had to work with ISN or Avetta or any of these third-party contractor kind of companies, they often expect your rate to be below 1, which, that, in my personal opinion, that's not going to happen in our industry. until we're fully automated, there's just way too much exposure. You know, commercial front load drivers pushing, pulling containers and ice and snow and all these different elements. You know, there's going to be a potential injury situation there. Let alone rear load drivers, where we're still doing, you know, backdoor service and, you know, picking up containers and carrying them, you know, 100 yards to the truck. So that is the biggest challenge we have. So that's the TRIR, that's employee injuries. There really isn't an industry number when it comes to auto liability crashes and rates. That's something that we had been working on with NWRA for quite a while. They're finally doing a study, and I can't remember which group it's with. Kirk Sander would know. But to try to capture some of that information to come up with what would be considered best in class for an incident rate regarding crashes.
Okay,
But
thank you.
there really isn't one, unfortunately, because everybody kind of does crashes differently in terms of, do mailboxes count? If it's on $100, do we count it? Is it only metal on metal in terms of passenger vehicles? You know, there's so many different ways you can calculate that number. There just isn't a standard around it.
Well, speaking of humans, Allison wanted some comment on the issue of safety at publicly accessible transfer stations or landfills,
Yeah.
and guidance around how we deal with the public, especially regarding scavenging. And I think you mentioned that before, but anybody who's been to a drop-off knows that you have
Yep.
people who don't know are doing all kinds of things there, and you're going, you really mean to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's those are separating them in their own space is important, but once they're there, what they do, that's challenging, right? So one of the things that we tried to do at Republic, quite frankly, is we had a big, I guess, initiative around surveillance cameras. So at least you have video footage of what they're doing. And if you have rules like, you know, you have to wear a vest or you have to wear gloves, or, you know, you can put rules into place for general public. They're on your site. You can tell them you got to wear a vest. And then if an incident does happen and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, you at least you have, you know, surveillance coverage of that. Um, so that's hard. That's really hard to deal with, but best way to do it is to have a requirement in place, have some sort of surveillance, and then, you know, hopefully people follow the rules.
Are there any design aspects that people should keep in mind when putting together a publicly accessible space that will,
Great
to
question.
the to the extent that you can, create guardrails that will protect them from themselves?
Yeah, great question. So the picture that I had, I'm going to go back to it because I think it's a good one. So in the picture here, you can see how there's basically this really small, low retaining wall, but there's not like a big gate or fence that they have to navigate. So yes, they have to pick this mattress up to about waist high, but between the container and that wall, the fall hazard of falling into that container is pretty low. Sometimes what I've seen is the container is literally flat with the surface that you're dumping into, and then they have like some sort of fence or cables that need to be navigated by the customers to dump material in there. Or I've even seen some that are really unsafe where they only put the chain up when they're not in use, but when customers are actually using it, they take it down, and then it's just a freaking fall right off into the container.
Mhm.
So from a design perspective, having something around the waist height, like you can see in this picture, this one is a, if you could design it the safest way, something like this would be the best way to design it. The only thing I would do that this one doesn't do as well is I would paint this concrete that you can see in the picture here yellow. Just like you can see the ballards in the background are yellow. That's the only addition I'd make, is I would add some paint to make sure that people know, you know, that you're not supposed to go across there or climb on there.
Yeah, well, we hate to see the mattress going into the bin.
Yeah.
But if I was going to fall into the bin, I'd be glad if the mattress was there. So
Yeah, exactly.
catch 22. Okay. Any other questions from our audience? Not seeing anything show up here. Sometimes, you know, the popcorn in the microwave gets quiet and you know it's either burnt or
Yep.
done.
So I do have one more slide to share.
Okay, please
But
do. Yeah.
just kind of in conclusion, one of the things I want to challenge you with is the hierarchy of control. So from a safety perspective, you've probably seen this triangle on the right where there's hierarchy of control around injuries for employees. So just as an example, you have somebody working in a maintenance shop or they're working at a recycling facility, but you're actually trying to protect your workers, right? The easiest thing to do is provide PPE, but that's the least effective. You can put in administrative controls and change what people's responsibilities are. That's effective, but not super effective. Engineering controls are literally isolating people away from what the hazard is. So you're providing some sort of distance with maybe automation or some other things to try to keep them safer. Substitution, where you're actually removing the hazard from the place with something that's less hazardous. So just a simple example of this one would be if you look at the hazardous materials that your workforce is exposed to, what is that level of hazard? Paint in a paint shop, for example, are there volatile organics in it, or can you use a soy-based paint? What can you do to actually replace what the hazard is? And then ultimately, the most effective is to just flat out eliminate the hazard. Best example of this one, I mentioned it before with rear load work, is instead of rear load work, if you have an automated side load, you're eliminating the hazard associated with lifting. So the hierarchy of control when it comes to employees and not having employees be injured, I think we probably as safety people look at pretty frequently. What we don't do so much though is look at it from an auto liability perspective. And what I would have you do is, again, going back to the question of what's a good rate, whatever your rate is for vehicle crashes, think about it a little bit differently in terms of preventing injury. The PPE one is simple, it's seatbelts. At the end of the day, that's the best thing an employee driving a piece of equipment at a landfill. If it rolls over, if you have your seatbelt on, you're going to be much safer than if you don't. If somebody crosses a center line, hits your truck head on, if you're wearing a seatbelt, you're going to be way better off. So from a PPE perspective, seatbelts is a great approach to try to protect your employees if they're involved in a crash. Changing the way people work is really skills-based training. At the end of the day, you really want to make sure that people are trained on skills and what they're doing and what they're not doing. Truck technology is a great way to isolate the hazards and make sure that you're isolating people away from that. That's an engineering control type of thing. Substitution is ultimately high vision cabs, right? You could have a high vision cab, which provides better visibility, and you're basically replacing that hazard. You still have the blind spot, but it's smaller, right? You have that opportunity. And then lastly, and this is one of the ones that we focused on very heavily at Republic, is route changes. There's certain stops on your routes that just the time of day maybe you're servicing just isn't best. And me and Peter were talking before this, and I use the examples of schools. I think it's probably pretty basic for drivers to not pick up schools while they're, going into session or the end of the day with kids all over the place. But think about that for all of the different stops you have. What time of day are you picking them up? What's your approach to that stop? Is there a better location for that container? And not just those, but also post-collection, vehicle spacing. If you, again, isolate that active face so that single cylinder dump truck isn't 20 feet away from another piece of equipment and you're physically removing it from the active face at that moment in time, you're eliminating the hazard. So think more broadly when it comes to hierarchy of control. Think about eliminating all different hazards that you may have in the workplace and not just think of employees. And I'll stop there, and so we can kind of see everybody for the big close here.
So Jim, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. Have a big round of applause for Mr. Olson. Standing ovation. Wow. All right. And thank you for everybody who's joined us today. And thank you again to SWANA for co-sponsoring with us. Really appreciate the opportunity to work again with SWANA on what I think is an important conversation. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of events coming up on our MRN calendar, and Kristen has shared hers as well. If you haven't signed up for any of these, please feel free to do so. And of course, if you're not a member, please feel free to run over to our website and to the SWANA website and sign up for membership today. Again, it's what we do together that really makes the biggest difference. So please join the team, be part of the solution, not just a bystander. So with that, I'm going to let everybody go grab some lunch. And one more time, big round of applause and thank you to Jim Olson. The recording will be posted shortly. Please take it and share it with any and all that you think might appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
Peter.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.